begin with a gripping hook. The moment the director's voice boomed through the glass atrium, a rifle shot of fear tore through me. "We're terminating your tenure, effective immediately," it said, and the room exhaled in unison as if someone had slammed a door in our faces. My name hung in the air, then dropped, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. And in the back of the crowd, I saw them, the faces I'd known since kindergarten. The ones who'd called my dream ridiculous at every family gathering, who'd whispered that I was embarrassing the name I wore. My sister's mouth curled into a smirk I'd recognize from a decade of birthday toasts. My father's jaw locked, the way it does when he's pretending not to hear you. In that instant, I learned something brutal and necessary. The price of truth is exile from the classroom you were promised, and the cost is paid in the currency of belonging. If their laughter could extinguish a career, their laughter would have to witness its own obituary in full. The painful departure and relentless pursuit. They told me I'd fail, that I was chasing a ridiculous dream, urban ecological restoration, guerrilla gardening, reclaiming derelict city blocks with native plants. They said I was a fool to think a seed could outlive a rumor. And yet, when the doors closed behind me, I didn't crumble. I walked. I packed the few belongings I hadn't sold to a grant-funded project, the tangle of field notebooks, the weathered gloves, the smear of soil under my nails, and I walked into a city that looked back at me with its blank, gray jaw. The dismissal from the institute, my professional life declared null because I'd blown the whistle on unethical genetic experiments, felt like the world turning its back on truth itself. The family know-it-alls who'd hammered me with ridicule now watched as I spoke with people on street corners, as I handed children sunflowers and told them the story of seeds that refused to stay buried. I started with nothing but a map of empty lots and a stubborn conviction that green can be a revolution. The early days were a quiet war. I learned to work in the margins, to plant native species in the shadow of cranes, to coax pollinators into parking lots, to catalog the city's veins, the rivers, the rails, the abandoned buildings into corridors of life. The ridicule followed me like a weather pattern, but so did the people who believed that a patch of green could change a life. A grandmother who taught me to harvest rainwater, a teenager who measured soil health with a smile, a councilwoman who finally listened when residents asked for a year-round, living garden instead of a yearly spectacle. And yes, there were the moments when I thought of quitting, of slipping back into the predictable path of conventional science, where everything is controlled and measurable and safe. But the flame in my chest refused to die. If they mocked me for aiming to heal a city with native grasses, then I would become a chorus of those grasses, steady, resilient, impossible to silence. The ascent was not a single leap, but a dozen small, stubborn steps. We faced legal hurdles, threats of eviction, and the calculus of budgets that would rather fund a shiny new project than sustain a living ecosystem. We built networks, residents who dragged wheelbarrows to a forgotten lot after work, young botanists who traded lab benches for field journals, artists who painted pollinator corridors on brick walls to remind people why the work mattered. Each success a corner where dragonflies settled, a schoolyard where children learned to identify 10 local species, a riverbank rewilded felt like a ledger entry against the wound of that day in the Institute. The initial ridicule did its work. It sharpened me, forced me to learn to argue with facts, to argue with heart, to argue with the stubborn truth that restoration is justice in a city's breath. The arduous ascension and profound triumph. Years folded into seasons, and seasons folded into a transformation the city could not deny. Derelict lots bloomed into microforests. Former vacant lots became living classrooms where kids measured soil carbon and kicked off science fairs with seed bombs and sunlit laughter. We weren't just planting trees, we were rewriting city memory. The movement grew teeth. Policy pilots turned into district-wide programs. Residents who had once sneered now joined hands because they could see the difference in their own blocks, the way rainwater found its way into the soil, the way burbs found a city that listened to them. There were moments of pure, stubborn triumph that fed the embers when the winds of doubt swirled again. The media finally stopped mislabeling our work as a hobby and started calling it what it was. Urban ecological restoration, a discipline with roots and reign. We secured a mosaic of funding, crowdfunding for community gardens, grants for pocket wetlands, partnerships with municipal bodies that once viewed me as a whistleblower and now invited me to speak at citywide climate forums. The work testifies to the argument I had made all along, that restoration is not a luxury, but a necessity, that healing a neighborhood heals its people, that the act of planting is a vow to the future. And then came the moment that felt almost unearned. I stood before a council chamber where a river corridor was being declared a citywide green spine, a network of habitats that stitched neighborhoods together. The crowd roared not for me, but for us, the living tapestry we had woven from seed, soil, and stubborn faith. I had become the proof they had mocked into silence. Yes, but more than that. I had become a guidepost for what a life aligned with truth can accomplish when it refuses to bow. Cathartic return and poetic justice. I came home not to a parlor of praise, but to a street that had learned to breathe again. The old block where my father's workshop once stood, where my sister learned to be skeptical of every dream, now ran with the green spine we built, a ribbon of native grasses, a line of trees that caught the morning light, a wetland pocket that sang after rain. It wasn't dramatic theater. It was ecological architecture, the kind that heals names as well as soils. And then they came, my family, watching, almost reluctant to believe, as a community gathered to celebrate the first annual Day of Seeds on our street. The moment I saw my mother's eyes fill with moisture, I understood the ledger of karma we'd all been tallying in secret. "You did this," my sister whispered, not with sarcasm, but with a tremor of awe. My father stood quietly, hands still in his pockets, and the old words he'd used to wound me, ridiculous, embarrassment, waste, felt smaller in the glow of blossoms and bees. They watched as teenagers pressed their faces to the glassy surface of a small, restored creek that ran along the curb where a tire burned days ago, the way the water found its way through the city's bones. They watched as neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now offered seedlings, mulch, and plans for new plots. And they heard the words I spoke, not as triumphant boasting, but as a simple invitation that we all belong to the soil that holds us. If the ledger has a moral, it's this: the truth you tend will outgrow the silence that tries to bury it. The dream I was mocked for, urban ecological restoration, became the language by which we healed a block, then a district, then a city. The same family who once doubted now asks how they can learn, how they can plant, how they can protect what we've grown. The city's soil has become our shared truth, and in the soil I found my worth, not in the applause of gatekeepers, but in the quiet resilience of roots breaking asphalt, and the bright chorus of life returning to places that forgot they deserved to be alive. I'll end with a line I wish I'd known sooner. A dream isn't ridiculous because the world says so. A dream is ridiculous only until it isn't. I carry that honesty as a gardener carries a trowel ready to sow, to listen, to fight for what is right beneath our feet. The karma of derision, once heavy as stone, now clarifies into something buoyant, a future that grows taller the more people pull their sleeves and join in. And when the next generation asks me how I learned to turn despair into habitat, I'll tell them this. You plant because you believe in the possibility that a single seed can alter a city's weather, and in the kindness of a family learning to see the green you became.